be patient, and careful in how you communicate things. If we don't know what the answer to a question is, we tell them. We're very upfront and say, "Hey, look, we're not sure. We haven't run into that issue before. Let's let's wait until the next meeting. Give us some time to either reach out to the lawyer if it's a legal question, or let's go through the rules and regulations or bylaws for that."
A regular highlight of the HOA Insights podcast is our Board Heroes feature, where we dedicate one episode each month to celebrate the remarkable efforts of HOA board members. To us, a board hero is one of the 2 million elected volunteers who deserve recognition for excelling in a role that often goes unnoticed. Today, we're excited to spotlight one of these exceptional board heroes and share their inspiring story. If you match our definition of a board hero or know someone who does, please reach out to us. Our contact details and those of our sponsors are provided in the show notes.
Welcome back to HOA Insights, common sense for common areas. I'm Robert Nordlund, and I'm here to share the story of another returning board hero named Calvin Ball. This is episode number 99, and if you missed meeting our other board heroes, including Calvin's previous appearance in episode 48, you can find them easily on our website, hoainsights.org, on our YouTube channel, or by subscribing to HOA Insights on your favorite podcast platform. Now, let's reacquaint ourselves with Calvin and hear a bit about the story he'd like to share.
Hi, I'm Calvin. I've been a proud volunteer board member for my HOA for about 6 years total. I've been the board treasurer for about 3 years and the secretary for 1 year. When I'm not immersed in board responsibilities, I'm adding to my accounting credentials, currently studying for the CPA. In addition to studying for the CPA, I just kind of hang out with my wonderful cat Gigi. So some of my experience on the board, in 3 words, it would probably be transparency, planning, and focus. My time in the community, it's been quite a while now. It's been at 6 years, and we've been trying to increase our ability to communicate with the entire community so that they're aware of what goes on, what the board's responsibilities are, what their responsibilities are as a unit owner, and how we can both work together to build more of a relationship with the community and, keep property values high and make sure everything's maintained well.
Calvin's community is a 168-unit condominium association located in Maryland that's about 30 years old and has an annual budget of around $700,000. The last time we spoke to Calvin, he and the rest of the board were intent on making sure that their community lasted another 30 years and emphasized the importance of transparency and communications to their homeowners. It's been about a year since that conversation, so we decided to follow up and ask Calvin if he and the board had made any changes to the ways that they communicate to their community.
One of the things that we've actually implemented within the past year is, as we're preparing our agenda for the next meeting, we actually put together a list of kind of reminders for the community of things that are in the rules and regulations and or the bylaws, just to keep people informed of what they've already signed up for in purchasing their unit. They need to follow these rules and regulations and the bylaws. And before each meeting, we actually put specific items that we've noticed over the past month since the last meeting that residents haven't been following or unit owners haven't been following, so that they can just be reminded that, hey, this is actually the proper way of handling this situation, or you shouldn't be doing this, you should be doing it a different way, or the reverse side of that, you should be doing this and you shouldn't just be sitting idle.
Maintaining a simple list of reminders to the community is a great way to keep homeowners informed and involved with the community, especially if, like Calvin's board, you're keeping track of that list and updating it as needed at every board meeting. However, reminders exist because there are habits that either need to be reinforced in the community or eliminated entirely. We decided to ask Calvin if there was a specific incident that prompted this solution.
Yeah, I mean, most of it has been general. The biggest things that we've had issues with are parking. A lot of residents, our buildings are really unique. When people think of condos, we actually have several buildings. our buildings are very much smaller than most condominiums. A lot of people, when they think of a condominium, they think of a high rise and there's a parking garage, and so there's only one in and out. We're kind of more in a suburban environment, so there's a lot more road. There's a lot you can pull up to each one of these buildings and just kind of park there, but it still can block, half the road. We only have, two lanes, one for each direction. So a lot of people tend to pull up to the front of the building and just kind of park there regardless of without any regard of how long they're going to be there. So we've had people park there for an hour, 2 hours overnight, and just leave the car just on park there without keys in it, just off, no flashers. And we have no idea whose vehicle it is. We don't know if it's a unit owner or a visitor, and so that's kind of been a concern for us. And unfortunately, we have plenty of parking, so it's not like parking spaces are, at a premium. We have several parking spots that are open for people to use, but they simply don't use them out of pure laziness, or uh, they're not aware that they can park there, even though it's clear that there's parking spaces. And then the second issue we've kind of run into that was a big issue is our dumpsters. Um, we have 2 dumpsters for the entire community, and a lot of people just kind of throw anything in the dumpster. And kind of like a lot of your commercial dumpsters, there's usually a fence around it and some walking space. A lot of people feel that they can just leave things outside of the dumpster, and they can be rather large items like, furniture. If they're remodeling a kitchen, we've seen kitchen cabinetry, um, mattresses, all sorts of things that people just kind of leave outside of the dumpster. And we actually have to pay our trash removal service to come back a second time and it's a separate charge every time to remove these items. And so that was part of an agenda item we told people is, hey, this is an extra expense that you're paying for your dues and your future dues. If you continue to put things outside of the dumpster, it's, more trash expense for us. So, it's it's been an interesting journey to communicate that. And I guess the third point I'd like to add is our community is a private community. So we're within a small city limits. And so a lot of people think that we are entitled to city services. Um, when in fact, when the community was created in the late 80s, early 90s, they actually took the city to court to try to force them to provide services to our community. But the city actually won the case because we declared ourselves a private community. And when you declare yourself as a private community, your private services are no longer provided to you. So you have to provide them as a community. And so that's why through our assessments, we have to pay for things like trash, snow removal, and other maintenance items.
Hearing Calvin describe the inconsiderate behavior of some of the homeowners in his community was disheartening, but it did validate something that Julie Adamen and I have discussed numerous times on this program, that some people are just plain not well suited for community association living. Well, given that Calvin's community was originally established as a private community, there appeared to be a disconnect between what the homeowners felt entitled to and what they were willing to give back in turn. So we next asked Calvin if he knew what the original motivation for establishing themselves as a private community was.
It's difficult to say. If I had to make a good guess, it's the community has a history of wanting to be very private, not wanting to be in the spotlight, and so they've kind of I guess they took it upon themselves when it was created, or at least the people that put it together decided we want to be a private community and not want to deal with public services, and not have to rely on public services, to keep the community maintained. And they believed that in the future, I guess, future unit owners would want the same thing. Unfortunately, as time has kind of evolved since the late 80s, early 90s, a lot of people tend to not want to do things themselves. So they kind of like to outsource. And unfortunately, people have kind of felt like they've been in, just by paying fees, they think that they're entitled to quality service, while not receiving and they get frustrated if they don't receive that quality service. And so it's just through that transparency, as I talked about the three main points, being transparent and letting people know that unfortunately our community is not in the same boat as other communities where they might be getting public services. Unfortunately, we have to pay for those services, and sometimes the fees have not kept up with the price of those services. And so if you expect services to be high quality, then the assessments will have to match that.
Transparency was not only a common thread in our conversation with Calvin, but lack of transparency is also a common thread among complaints we hear about community associations in general. We discussed this with Carol Lawrence in our last Board Hero episode. Homeowners new to community associations often feel like there isn't enough communication from the board. Many of our Board Heroes feel like it's the homeowners who need to get involved and engage with the association if they want to stay in the loop. We asked Calvin how he felt about this dynamic and if he felt there was a way to maintain the balance between these two perspectives.
Kind of a balance. It's a two-way street, because when you go to purchase your unit, you kind of have to do the research as a home buyer to say, hey, okay, this unit is in an HOA. What does that entail? When you purchase a unit, you should have the bylaws and rules and regulations available to you so that you can read through them and understand what you're kind of buying into. One issue we've run into is that a lot of realtors actually are not being very transparent with home buyers. At least in our neighborhood, a lot of our unit owners, when they buy a unit, they come in and some of them don't even know how much their fees are, who to pay. And they're oftentimes very confused, which is kind of odd because you think the real estate agent would tell them, and it's actually illegal for the real estate agent to not, disclose that information. At least in the state of Maryland, they have to disclose certain information. So it was kind of alarming, and we don't really have much recourse for that, which is kind of where the board has to come in and fill in the gaps where the real estate agent didn't. And that's kind of where we have to inform this new unit owner, hey, this is how much your fee is. This is who you have to pay. And these are the services that you're getting. Do you have a copy of, the bylaws, rules, and regulations? And if you have any disagreements, you can come to the meetings and discuss them with us, or you can decide to just, sell the unit immediately after buying it if you don't agree to the terms. If you're a unit owner and you disagree with the terms, you still have to pay the assessments. It's not an optional thing. That's kind of some interesting, I guess, I don't know, for lack of a better term, a threat that we've gotten from some people is, look, I'm not getting the services I want, so I'm just going to withhold my payments. And we tell people, well, if you withhold your payments, we might slap interest and late fees on you. We can legally do so. So it's really interesting to try to have that conversation to let people know what they're really getting into.
Calvin's recommendation of doing your due diligence as a home buyer ties into another great tidbit from our last Board Hero episode. And in that episode, number 95, Carol mentioned that any prospective home buyer looking to purchase a home in an association-governed community should do their due diligence by reading their publicly available board meeting minutes. Now, if those are unavailable, it says a lot about the lack of transparency from that community association's board. We next asked Calvin if there was anything else that the board can be doing to improve their transparency towards prospective homeowners.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of another avenue for accountability in condo law and HOA law that could happen at the state level. Because obviously there's not many federal regulations on homeowners associations. Most of them are state. It's going to vary greatly by state what's required to be provided by boards and what's required to be communicated by real estate agents. I think that the number one thing is accountability. I think, unfortunately, HOA and condo law can be very comprehensive, but if there's no enforcement behind it, then it kind of just sits there and doesn't really get a lot accomplished. I know in the state of Maryland, we have quite a comprehensive HOA and condo law, which to their credit is great from a legislative standpoint. But unfortunately, enforcement mechanisms of it are very weak. And so the only the only avenue that is available is if someone reports you to the state. And a lot of people don't think that it's their obligation to report you, even if they disagree with you. So we've had a lot of unit owners say like, "Hey, we think you're doing something that's against the law or whatnot." Um, Sometimes they don't even understand what the law is, which is really interesting when they tell you that you might be breaking it. Um, and sometimes you look into it and turns out you're not breaking any law. People just kind of use it as a threat because that's in the condo laws, real estate agents, sharing that information. So unless that unit owner decides to rat out, so to speak, their real estate agent, there's not really going to be any way to enforce it. You can report real estate agents, you can report boards for certain things, but a lot of the times the state doesn't see it as a priority, um, or they just decide not to enforce it. So it's really, I think, accountability um, at the state level is kind of critical in making a significant difference.
Accountability is another topic that Calvin had a lot more to say about, especially as we circle back to discuss how his association tried to resolve the garbage situation in their community. But before we get to that, let's take a quick break to hear from one of our generous sponsors.
Is your HOA or condo self-managed and you don't want to work as hard volunteering? Are you full managed and looking to save money? Or are you looking to split the accounting from a manager's role for better service? Let Community Financials handle the monthly accounting for you. We collect dues, pay bills, produce financial reports, include portals, and help with other support services, all while providing awesome service. We'd love the opportunity to help you make your community accounting stress-free with our industry-leading systems and expert team. Visit our website, communityfinancials.com, to learn more.
And we're back. Before the break, Calvin spoke at length about the need for accountability, not only at an association level, but at the state level also. We decided to circle back and discuss this topic more at the level of individual accountability with regards to the garbage collection issue in his community. We asked Calvin if most homeowners were receptive to those assessment increases, even though those increases were the result of the behavior of only a few individuals in their community.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. It depends on who you talk to. A lot of the pushback is coming from people that are obviously doing the right thing, putting their trash in the dumpster, and we have no issues with them. It's usually those, the small percentage of the community that's abusing it. And unfortunately, we have no way of enforcing it. That's kind of what a lot of homeowners kind of bring up. They're saying, well, why can't we start enforcing this and start giving them a reason to use the dumpster properly so that, we can't, yeah, because even if we say, hey, it's an extra charge to the community, some of them still think, well, it's going to be cheaper for me to pay, we have 168 units. They figure, okay, if I'm paying 168th of the community's budget, if we got to pay an extra $100 for this to be removed, I'm only paying less than $1 to get it removed because they break up the cost through the community. Whereas if they took it to the dump themselves, it would take extra time, extra effort to drive it, and then to pay whatever dumping fee. And so a lot of people actually see it a financial incentive to throw it in the dumpster or put it in the area, and then we pay the extra, unfortunately, as a community. So they kind of take advantage of it. It's kind of a selfish thing, and we tell people, hey, if you see somebody doing it, let us know who it is, because if you know who it is and we can connect it to a unit owner, we can start enforcing it. And kind of back to the accountability and enforcement, sometimes regulations can actually be a hindrance and can actually make it very difficult to enforce things. So in Maryland, the condo law is very comprehensive, and it takes a lot of red tape just to send a violation and actually send a fee to that unit owner for doing so. If I read Maryland condo law correctly, and I'm not a legal expert or anything, so I don't want to make sure this advice isn't 100%. But I believe my interpretation is that you have to, one, send a violation notice in snail mail. They specify in the law that it needs to go through regular mail. It cannot be just an electronic communication. So we have to send a notice in the mail. to tell them that they violated this part of the bylaws, the rules and regulations, things like that. That is basically a first time, hey, kind of slap on the wrist, like, hey, don't do this again, kind of thing. If they do it a second time, or if the activity continues, then the board must set a hearing. They have to set an actual hearing date to meet in person with that person, with that individual that's violating something. And so the board gets to decide what that date is. That's a second letter that has to be mailed to the unit owner saying, hey, you violated this once. You've now violated it a second time. You must attend this meeting. If you attend this meeting, you can try to defend yourself. And then the board votes at that meeting to decide whether they can send a fee or violation in accordance with your bylaws. And so the state actually doesn't tell you, the state of Maryland doesn't tell you like what kind of fee you want to assess. That's where your bylaws come in. So our bylaws does have a fee mechanism, but you still have to follow what Maryland law says in giving all this notice, that you have to send that first letter of notice. And then the second violation actually has to happen within 12 months of the first notice. So say they violated something and then 18 months goes by and they do it again, you technically have to start over and send them the first notice again. So as long as somebody can just delay it for more than a year, they can actually avoid, doing hearings and all that. So it takes a very attentive board to enforce these policies in the state of Maryland, which is kind of a hindrance for us to prevent people from abusing the situation.
I can't say that I'm envious of Calvin or any association board member in Maryland for that matter, because volunteer board members shouldn't have to become politicians in order for their state laws and association bylaws to complement each other. We asked Calvin if he and the board would come up with any immediate solutions for this accountability issue.
The solutions to accountability is very difficult to come by. One option that we've come up with is security cameras. They've looked at that in the past. I actually sent a proposal to the board to say, hey, should we reach out to vendors to get a quote to see what would it take to get in some security cameras around the community to hold certain people accountable? Because at some point, this becomes unsustainable. We've discussed it in the past, and kind of similar to how the community was declared a private community, a lot of people are against these security cameras. They kind of fear that, oh, well, Big Brother's watching me or the board's watching me. We actually did have we had a unique situation. We actually had a camera in our clubhouse, not any of the other buildings, but just the clubhouse, because that is a purely shared environment. So when we had one in there before, the board members had access to the live feed. We rent out the clubhouse, and one incident happened where someone rented the clubhouse. We don't really have any restrictions on who you can bring to the clubhouse, as long as you don't damage anything in the clubhouse, abuse anything like that. You can rent it to have a party or some other gathering. Unfortunately, we've had a board member in the past who no longer lives here, but she was a very controlling board member, and so she would actually tap into the feed while people were renting out the clubhouse for these parties that she wasn't, invited to. And she then went around the community after the events and would say, "Oh, did you know so and so was, inviting this person or these people to the clubhouse, and they were doing this." And it's not like the people at the event were doing anything illegal or doing any damages. It was simply a personal, like, she had a personal axe to grind against this person. I guess she just didn't like who was renting the clubhouse and just wanted to, like, try to start trouble. And unfortunately, unit owners found out about this, and that's why a lot of people now, we have since removed the camera, and a lot of people are very hesitant to put any camera up anywhere now because of this, this abusive person in the past where they just wanted to tap into the feed and kind of technically the clubhouse is a public space. I mean, it's not like she was breaking any laws, but it's just that gray area of trust where the community doesn't have trust in a board now because one person decided that they wanted to tap into, this event feed. So it's a very contentious topic. I've brought it up, but unfortunately, with the violations now, popping up in our community, it's kind of been something that has crept up in people's minds now, saying, "Hey, should we put up security cameras now?" Because we've had a couple instances too where people's cars were broken into, or um, there's suspicious activity at a particular building, that we've run into, and there's nothing that we can point to that's necessarily illegal, but it's very suspicious. So a lot of people kind of ask, how can we keep an eye on this? And I told them, unfortunately, it's just gonna have to be you're gonna have to be either an eyewitness or we put in security cameras, and that's kind of where we're at right now. It's kind of at an impasse.
Surveillance and the use of security cameras in community associations is a polarizing topic, and Calvin's association certainly isn't the only one that's stuck at an impasse. We next asked for more details about the parking issues that Calvin mentioned earlier in order to see if his board had come up with any novel solutions to that problem. And here's what Calvin told us.
So with our parking situation, every unit has one reserved parking space. And when you purchase that unit, this is kind of another part with the realtor. The realtor should be telling you, what your parking space is. So all of the spots that are reserved to a unit have a number to them. Like you mentioned, the number doesn't exactly correlate to the unit number, but at least you have a number that is specific to your unit. I actually have the list um, in our rules and regulations where we know which parking spot is assigned to which unit. Um, and so a lot of people aren't, in their unit, they're either, they might be a married couple or even a family, because a lot of our units vary in size as well. So, um, you know, it's not unheard of to have a unit where there's more than one vehicle. And so we have at least one reserved parking space, and we have quite a bit of overflow. So next to the reserve spots are usually, like I said, we're in a suburban environment, so we're kind of spread out and have more space than a lot of condominiums. Now, the overflow parking is kind of scattered. Sometimes depending on the building you have, you might have some very close overflow parking. Some of the overflow parking on some buildings is a decent walk. Now, I mean, not crazy far, but if someone was having any mobility issues, it may not be suitable. But um, it kind of is what it is based off the geography. We didn't have quite enough spaces for 2 reserved spaces per unit. That's why we only have 1 per unit. But I went around the community and counted them. We have almost, I would say we have like 3/4 of enough for units to have, a second parking space. So, that's plenty enough to take care of people that, like I said, are either married and have 2 vehicles or have a family. Unfortunately, people are kinda just like water, they take the path of least resistance. So a lot of people, like I said, park in front of the building, or they park in the closest spot possible, whether it's their parking space or whether it's an overflow parking space. I know some people that actually park in an overflow space and not in their actual reserve spot. Uh, and that's kind of an unfortunate thing when you think about it, because technically no one is supposed to be in their reserve spot but them. And so if they decide to take an overflow spot, that's one less spot for a visitor or someone else to take, a vendor that's coming by to do some work on a unit, things like that. So we try to remind people, again, like I mentioned before in our agenda, that you should be parking in your reserve spot. And if you have an issue, with your spot, not being close enough, or if you need a handicap spot, then you can let the board know and we can do our best to accommodate that. Because legally, in so many circumstances, we do have to comply with that if there's a request sent in. But if you don't send a request in for a handicap spot and the board simply doesn't know, then you're not really going to have a case as a unit owner. A lot of people think that we already know what their personal situation is. Oh, well, can't you tell that I can't walk? Unfortunately, we're not around to talk to every person every day, to understand what they're going through. So if that's where kind of the transparency part comes in, where unit owners have to be transparent with us and say, hey, if you need an accommodation, you need to let us know, because just we don't automatically know when somebody needs an accommodation. And sometimes there's parts of the condo law where, unit owner is required to contact the board, where we can't just do things as we see fit. We need a reason to do many of the things that we do. So it's kind of again, a two-way street on what people need out of the parking situation. And if they don't tell us, then we kind of do the best thing that works for the community.
Calvin and his board were smart to not make any assumptions about when to give preferable parking accommodations to their residents. As Albert Einstein once said, assumptions are made and most assumptions are wrong. So with that being said, enforcing parking rules in a community can be a difficult task. Some associations keep detailed records of each resident's vehicle make, model, and license plate, while others expect their residents to act like adults and rely on the honor system. We asked Calvin if his association fit into either category.
For parking enforcement, we're still kind of, like you said, in an honor system. We kind of like to treat everybody as adults. I think we can all, if you're responsible for driving a vehicle, I think you should be able to know what your parking spot is and where you need to park and how to handle it. We also remind people that, even though you're in a private community, when you're on our road, it's still technically a public road. Public driving rules still apply. You still need your headlights on when it's dark out or when it's raining. Tires need to be on pavement and not on grass. There's just a lot of things that are very simple that we think are common sense, but unfortunately to some people they're not. But yeah, back to enforcement, it's just kind of expecting people to be adults and drive rationally. And unfortunately we have come into issue. Some people have brought it to our attention that some people like to speed. Some people like to park where they're not supposed to be parking, or they park across the lines and they end up taking 2 parking spaces. Kind of back to our red tape that we run into through the legislature. Maryland is a very difficult state to tow someone's vehicle. It has to be a very unique circumstance for you to tow the vehicle. I actually looked it up in Maryland law, and we cannot tow a vehicle, unless it's completely blocking the roadway. There's like I said, very specific reasons. And like there has to be a lot of notice. Maryland has a theme where you have to notify the person before you can do things, kind of like the violations in the board. You have to notify somebody that they're parked improperly. So, but we actually talked with our lawyer and they said, if they say they have an expired registration and we notify them, they could move it to like a different, I think in our bylaws, if we know that your vehicle hasn't moved in like a week, then we can start enforcing, violations. But Maryland law says, well, you have to notify them first, and then you have to wait like 48 hours or so after you notify them to see if they actually move it. According to our lawyer, you can give them notice to move their vehicle. And if they move it within 48 hours, all they have to do is move it to a different parking spot. They don't have to move it out of the community or anything. They just have to move it to a different parking spot. And then you have to keep giving them that 48-hour notice again. So as long as they just move it to a different parking spot, you can't tow it. And so we can only notify them that their registration is going to expire and that a police officer could give them a ticket. Now, the police officer has more authority to tow your vehicle. Now, if you give them a ticket and then you ignore the ticket, obviously, something can happen to your car. But we as an HOA can't really tow vehicles unless it's a very dire situation.
From Calvin's answer, it appeared that the state of Maryland's laws can present a huge obstacle to enforcing the bylaws of a community association, putting board members in a situation where they have to deliver the news that there is not an immediate solution to the problems plaguing their community. We decided to close out this interview by asking Calvin if he had any actionable advice for board members struggling with enforcing accountability in their community.
Yeah, the biggest takeaways I would have is be patient, and careful in how you communicate things. The patience is key because sometimes things drag out way longer than you want them to. We currently have big projects actually right now that we're big geographical construction projects that we're looking to do next year in 2025, that are going to take a lot of money, take a lot of time, planning, and patience, and just making sure they get done the right way so that you don't rush through them, and just being careful with how you say, and you know because like I said, a lot of people look into the law, and sometimes people want an axe to grind sometimes. And so if you say a particular thing as a board member, they may take it to heart. And if you don't come through with, say you make a promise and you don't come through with that promise, some people may come back and say, hey, well, you told me this. We try to be careful in how we give people information about what, again, our responsibilities, their responsibilities, what the law says, what our community bylaws and rules and regulations say. And we if we don't know what the answer to a question is, we tell them. We're very upfront and say, hey, look, we're not sure. We haven't run into that issue before. Let's wait until the next meeting. Give us some time to either reach out to the lawyer if it's a legal question, or let's go through the rules and regulations or bylaws for that. So it's just being patient and careful in how you act.
We want to publicly acknowledge Calvin for performing a thankless job well and compliment the entire board of directors for taking their responsibility seriously to act in the best interests of their association. We hope you gain some HOA insights from Calvin's story and that it helps you bring common sense to your common area. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to another great episode next week. And remember, if you match our definition of a board hero or know someone who does, please reach out to us. Our contact details are provided in the show notes.
You've been listening to HOA Insights, common sense for common areas. If you like the show and want to support the work that we do, you can do so in a number of ways. The most important thing that you can do is engage in the conversation. Leave a question in the comment section on our YouTube videos. You can also email your questions or voice memos to podcast@reservestudy.com or leave us a voicemail at 805-203-3130. If you gain any insights from the show, please do us a huge favor by sharing the show with other board members that you know. You can also support us by supporting the brands that sponsor this program. Please remember that the views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the hosts and guests, with the goal of providing general education about the community association industry. You'll want to consult licensed professionals before making any important decisions. Finally, this podcast was expertly mixed and mastered by Stokelight Video and Marketing. With Stokelight on your team, you'll reach more customers with marketing expertise that inspires action. See the show notes to connect with Stokelight.